I'd taken this route countless times, but tonight, something felt off. An eerie sense of unease settled in the pit of my stomach, making my skin prickle with discomfort. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, steadily gaining on me. At first, I thought it was just another driver heading home late, like me. But as the vehicle drew closer, I noticed it was tailgating me aggressively, its high beams blinding me in the mirror. I gritted my teeth and slowed down, hoping the driver would pass me by. Instead, the car stayed right on my bumper, its driver seemingly oblivious to my attempts to encourage them to pass. Anxiety gnawed at me as I kept my eyes on the road, constantly checking the rearview mirror to see if the car was still there. Minutes turned into an eternity as the unnerving pursuit continued. I couldn't make out any details about the driver or the vehicle. It was just an ominous silhouette in the darkness. Panic set in as I realized this was no ordinary road rage incident. It was something far more sinister. I decided to take the next exit, hoping to lose the relentless pursuer on the unfamiliar back roads. The exit led to a desolate, winding path through a dense forest. My heart raced as I navigated the treacherous turns, but the car behind me stayed on my tail. Fear began to consume me. I couldn't understand why this person was fixated on me. I'd done nothing to provoke them, and there was no logical reason for their aggressive pursuit. Desperation set in as I approached a deserted gas station. I swerved into the lot, tires screeching, and parked by the darkened pumps. My trembling hands fumbled for my phone, and I dialed 911, praying for a lifeline. The dispatcher assured me that help was on the way, but the minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly as I watched the menacing car pull into the gas station lot. The driver's side door opened, and a tall figure emerged, shrouded in darkness. I held my breath, fearing what would happen next. The figure approached my car, and for the first time, I could make out some details: wild, disheveled hair, and an unsettling grin that sent shivers down my spine. This person was clearly unhinged. I locked my car doors and continued to speak to the dispatcher, my voice quivering. The man outside began to pound on my windows, shouting incoherently. He seemed deranged, fueled by an unpredictable mix of anger and madness. Suddenly, the flashing lights of a police car cut through the darkness, and two officers approached, guns drawn. They ordered the man to step away from my car, and after a tense standoff, they managed to detain him. Relief washed over me as I watched the officers apprehend my tormentor. I would later learn that he had a history of mental illness and had become fixated on me for reasons known only to him. As I drove away from the gas station, the ordeal behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability and terror that had gripped me. It was a crisp autumn evening, and I was driving home from a beautiful wedding with my teenage son. The reception had been joyous, and we were content, basking in the warm afterglow of the celebration. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a gentle, silvery glow over the winding, deserted road ahead. As we continued our journey through the rural countryside, the atmosphere inside the car was serene, but outside, the night felt eerily quiet. Miles stretched between us and the nearest town, and we hadn't seen another soul for some time. That's when we spotted him, a lone hitchhiker standing on the side of the road, his thumb outstretched in a gesture of desperate hope. I exchanged a glance with my son, and our paternal instincts kicked in. It was the kind of night when you feel an obligation to help a fellow traveler in need. I pulled over, and the hitchhiker approached the car. He looked to be in his late 30s, with scruffy facial hair and a worn backpack slung over one shoulder. We greeted him with warm smiles, asking him where he was headed. He replied with a nod of gratitude and said he was headed to a town a few hours away. As he settled into the back seat, our conversation flowed easily. He introduced himself as Mark and shared stories of his travels and adventures. He seemed friendly and affable, and my initial unease about picking up a stranger began to dissipate. However, as the miles passed, a subtle shift occurred. Mark's stories became increasingly bizarre and disjointed. He spoke of distant places and strange encounters, weaving tales that grew more unsettling with each passing minute. My son shot me a concerned look, and I realized that we might have made a mistake. I decided to gently steer the conversation in a different direction, but Mark's responses grew vague, and he started muttering under his breath. He seemed agitated, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. As we approached the next intersection, I slowed down to let Mark know we'd be turning left. That's when he suddenly lunged forward, grabbing the steering wheel and attempting to jerk it to the right. Panic coursed through me as I fought to regain control of the car, my heart pounding in my chest. My son screamed in terror as I struggled with Mark, trying to push him away from the wheel. It was a terrifying struggle, and for a moment, I feared that we would careen off the road and into the darkness. But with a surge of adrenaline, I managed to push Mark back into his seat and regain control of the car. Breathing heavily, I yelled at Mark to get out of the car, my voice laced with anger and fear. He complied, stumbling out onto the roadside. I sped away from him as fast as I could, my hands still trembling on the wheel. As we drove on, my son and I were shaken to our cores. We couldn't comprehend what had just happened, why Mark had turned from a seemingly harmless hitchhiker into a violent, unhinged stranger. We contemplated reporting the incident to the authorities, but we couldn't find a logical explanation for his behavior. The encounter haunted us for the rest of our journey home. We couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped a terrible fate. I had been at a friend's house, and now I was heading back home, my grip on the steering wheel tightening as I navigated the lonely road. As I continued down the isolated highway, I felt a sudden shudder ripple through my car. The engine spluttered and died, leaving me coasting to a stop on the side of the road. Panic began to creep in as I tried to restart the engine, but it refused to respond. My heart raced as I realized I was stranded in the middle of nowhere. Just when despair was threatening to consume me, I saw the dim glow of headlights approaching from behind. Relief washed over me as a beat-up old van pulled over, and a man with unkempt hair and disheveled clothing stepped out. He approached my car and introduced himself as Mike, offering to take a look at the engine. I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to trust this stranger who had come to my rescue. But the alternative was spending the night alone on this deserted road, and fear pushed me to accept his help. Mike opened the hood and began tinkering with the engine, his tools clanging in the eerie silence. As I watched him work, a sense of unease washed over me. Mike's movements were deliberate but oddly furtive, like he was hiding something. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mike straightened up and turned to face me. A sinister smile played on his lips, and he said, "I fixed your car, but I think I deserve something in return." My heart plummeted, and my stomach churned with dread. I asked him what he meant, my voice trembling. Mike's eyes bore into mine, his gaze cold and calculating, as he made it clear that he expected a certain kind of payment for his assistance. I was trapped, alone with this strange and menacing man on a desolate highway. Fear surged through me, but I had to think fast. Desperation took hold, and I reached for my phone, pretending to call for help while keeping my eye on Mike. His demeanor grew increasingly agitated, and he demanded that I end the call. I feigned compliance, but I knew I needed a plan, and fast. With trembling hands, I unbuckled my seatbelt and made a run for it, sprinting away from the car, leaving everything behind. I could hear Mike cursing behind me as he gave chase, but I pushed through the darkness, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The woods loomed ahead, and I plunged into them, hoping to lose him in the dense underbrush. Hours passed as I stumbled through the woods, terrified and disoriented. I finally emerged onto another road, where a passing car stopped to help. I explained my harrowing encounter with Mike, and the driver called the police. They found my car, abandoned by the side of the road, but Mike was nowhere to be seen. The police assured me they would search for him, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if Mike was still out there, lurking in the shadows. In the aftermath of that night, I felt a profound sense of vulnerability. I had narrowly escaped a perilous situation, and the memory of that sinister stranger haunted my every thought. I was left with a chilling reminder that danger could strike when you least expect it, even on the loneliest of roads. It was a chilly autumn evening, and I was making my way home from a friend's house. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty road. My gas gauge was flirting with the dreaded E, so I pulled into a dimly lit gas station on the outskirts of town. As I parked at the pump and climbed out of my car, I couldn't help but notice the eerie silence that enveloped the area. The only sound was the faint hum of the gas station's fluorescent lights overhead. I shook off the unease and began filling up my tank. Just as I was lost in thought, the ominous growl of an engine pierced the quiet night. I turned to see a sleek black sedan with tinted windows pulling into the station. It rolled to a stop at the pump opposite mine, and the engine died, plunging us back into an unsettling silence. 3 men emerged from the car, all wearing dark clothing and baseball caps pulled low over their faces. Alarm bells started ringing in my head as they approached, their steps deliberate and synchronized. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I tried to focus on my task, avoiding eye contact as I continued pumping gas, hoping they would mind their own business. But my heart was pounding in my chest, and a bead of sweat trickled down my temple despite the cool night air. As they drew closer, I could make out their faces in the harsh glow of the gas station's lights. Their expressions were hard, their eyes devoid of any warmth or humanity. Panic welled up inside me, and I fumbled to finish refueling my car. One of the men, the tallest of the trio, stepped forward and asked me for a lighter. I stammered that I didn't have one, my voice trembling. The men exchanged a quick glance, and a sinister smile played on their lips. Then, as if out of nowhere, another car pulled into the gas station, its headlights sweeping across the scene. The sudden arrival of this unexpected savior startled the menacing trio, and they retreated to their car, slipping into the shadows. The new arrival, a middle-aged woman, sensed my distress and asked if I was okay. I explained what had just transpired, and she reassured me that I was safe now. She offered to wait until I had finished refueling and even walked me back to my car, watching as I locked the doors. As I continued my journey home, my hands still trembling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped a terrible fate. I was just an ordinary pizza delivery driver, navigating the labyrinthine streets of our small town, delivering cheesy pies and meaty delights to hungry customers. Most nights were uneventful, just a routine of orders, deliveries, and tips. But there was one night, one terrifying night, that still haunts my dreams. I had received an order for a delivery to a remote location on the outskirts of town. It was an odd request, but the promise of a generous tip lured me into my car, pizzas securely placed in the passenger seat. The address led me deeper into the darkness of the rural outskirts, the road narrowing and winding as I ventured farther away from the comforting glow of streetlights. My headlights sliced through the inky blackness as I followed the directions, relying heavily on my GPS. The anticipation of the tip made the eerie journey feel worth it, at least until I rounded a bend and saw it, a makeshift roadblock illuminated by my headlights. My heart sank as I pulled my car to a stop. Before me stood a gang of menacing men, bathed in the stark glow of my headlights. They were dressed in ragged clothes, their faces obscured by shadowy hoodies and baseball caps. The atmosphere was thick with tension as I rolled down my window, dread coiling in my stomach. One of the men, the apparent leader, approached my car, his face partially revealed by the dim light. He was scruffy, with an unkempt beard and a cold, calculating gaze that sent shivers down my spine. He asked for my wallet and phone, his voice low and menacing. I tried to stammer out a protest, but he leaned closer, revealing a glint of something metallic tucked into his belt. It didn't take much for me to realize that cooperating was my only option. I handed over my wallet and phone, a sense of vulnerability engulfing me as I did. The leader took my belongings without a word, then signaled for the others to move aside. They cleared the roadblock, allowing me to pass. The tension in the air was palpable as I slowly drove past them, their eyes never leaving my car. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel as I continued down the dark road, my heart pounding in my chest. I was left shaken, robbed of my belongings, but more importantly, robbed of my sense of safety. I finally reached a remote location, delivered the pizzas, and recounted the harrowing encounter to my manager. We called the police, but I knew the chances of catching those men were slim. It was a nightmarish experience that changed me forever. From that night on, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability, the haunting memory of those hooded figures lurking in the darkness. I've been a trucker for years, driving long hauls across the country, and I've seen my fair share of strange things on the road. But nothing could have prepared me for that one night, that chilling encounter that still makes my skin crawl. It was a moonless night, the kind that swallows the world in darkness, and I was navigating the empty highways. The hum of the engine was my only companion, and the only other signs of life were the occasional pairs of headlights approaching from the opposite direction. As I continued down the desolate stretch of road, a pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, gaining on me fast. I didn't think much of it at first. It's common for trucks to pass each other on the highway. But as the headlights drew closer, I noticed something was off. The truck tailing me was an old, beat-up rig, its once bright paint now faded to a dull gray. It was a stark contrast to the polished, modern trucks that typically shared the road with me. The driver seemed determined to get closer, tailgating me relentlessly. My unease grew with each passing mile. I signaled to change lanes, hoping to let the aggressive driver pass, but he matched my movements, staying dangerously close. My heart started to race as I realized this wasn't just an impatient trucker trying to overtake me. There was something sinister about the way he clung to my tail. I decided to take the next exit, hoping to put some distance between us, but the truck followed suit. Panic gnawed at my insides as I contemplated my options. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pursued by someone with malicious intent. I reached for my CB radio, my voice trembling as I broadcasted a call for help. The response was immediate, a fellow trucker offering to guide me to the nearest rest stop where we could contact the authorities. As we approached the rest stop, the menacing trucker finally backed off, disappearing into the darkness. I pulled into the rest stop, my heart still pounding, and met my fellow trucker who had come to my rescue. He was a grizzled veteran, weathered by years on the road, and he shared my unease. We reported the incident to the police, who promised to keep an eye out for the rogue truck. But as I lay in my sleeper cab that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter was far from over. The following days were a blur of anxiety and paranoia. I constantly scanned the road behind me, my nerves on edge. It was as if the sinister trucker was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I became obsessed with finding answers, poring over news articles and message boards in search of any information about the mysterious trucker. But there was nothing, no reports of similar encounters, no sightings of the old, gray rig. Weeks turned into months, and eventually, the fear began to recede. Life on the road went back to its usual routine, and I slowly regained my sense of security. But the memory of that chilling encounter still haunts me, a constant reminder that the open road can be a treacherous place, where darkness and danger lurked just beyond the headlights. I've been a tow truck driver for years, and I've seen my fair share of breakdowns in all kinds of places. But nothing could have prepared me for that night, that chilling encounter that still haunts my nightmares. It was a frigid winter evening, and I just finished up a long shift. I was ready to head home, curl up with a hot meal, and forget about work for a while. But then the call came in, a breakdown on an isolated road miles away from the city. Reluctantly, I fired up the old tow truck and headed out into the dark. The road I was sent to was a desolate stretch through a dense forest, with towering trees casting eerie shadows in the dim moonlight. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crunch of my tires on the icy pavement. As I neared the location, I could see a vehicle pulled over to the side of the road, its hazard lights flashing weakly in the darkness. I parked my truck behind it and climbed out, my breath forming frosty clouds in the freezing air. Approaching the stranded car, I saw it was an old sedan, its windows frosted over from the cold. I knocked on the driver's side window, but there was no response. My flashlight revealed the car's interior to be empty, the engine still running. I called out, but my voice seemed to disappear into the abyss of the forest. Unease settled in as I considered the possibility that the driver might have wandered off into the woods in search of help. I decided to investigate further. I left my truck's headlights on, casting an eerie glow on the deserted road. With my flashlight in hand, I ventured into the forest, my boots crunching through the snow. The trees seemed to close in around me as I ventured deeper into the darkness. My imagination played tricks on me, conjuring up all sorts of terrifying scenarios. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone or something was lurking in the shadows. After what felt like an eternity, I came across a small clearing, and there, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The driver of the stranded car was standing in the center of the clearing, his back to me. He was dressed in tattered clothes, his shoulders hunched as if he were in pain. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out, my voice quivering with fear. There was no response, just an eerie silence that seemed to stretch on forever. I cautiously approached him, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, I could see that his skin was unnaturally pale, almost translucent. His hair was long and matted, obscuring his face. "Sir, I'm here to help," I said, reaching out to touch his shoulder. But as my hand made contact, he turned around, and that's when I saw his face. His eyes were empty voids, devoid of any life or emotion. His mouth was stretched into a grotesque smile, revealing rows of sharp, yellow teeth. His skin was a sickly shade of gray, and his clothes were caked with dirt and dried blood. I stumbled back in horror, my flashlight falling from my hand. The creature before me let out a guttural, inhuman sound, and then it lunged. I barely had time to react, scrambling backward as it reached for me with its bony fingers. I bolted through the trees, my heart pounding in my chest, and didn't stop until I reached my tow truck. I slammed the door shut and peeled out of there, leaving the creature and the stranded car behind. I never reported what I saw to the police. Who would believe me anyway? I still have nightmares about that night, the face of that creature haunting my every moment. I've stopped taking calls in the dead of night on isolated roads, and I avoid the forest at all costs. But sometimes, as I'm driving down a dark, deserted road, I can't help but wonder if that creature is still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. And that thought terrifies me more than anything else. It was supposed to be a memorable family road trip, a chance to bond, create lasting memories, and see the beauty of our country. We packed up our old SUV, my wife, our 2 kids, and I, and hit the open road. The first few days were idyllic, picturesque landscapes rolling past us, laughter filling the air, and the promise of adventure around every bend. But then, on the outskirts of a small town, our GPS informed us that the road ahead was closed due to construction. With no alternative routes in sight and the sun setting, we had no choice but to follow a detour sign down a narrow, winding lane. The lane seemed to grow narrower with every mile, the trees on either side crowding in like silent sentinels. As we ventured deeper into this claustrophobic corridor, my unease grew. The dense foliage overhead blocked out the dying light, casting an eerie darkness over the road. My wife tried to reassure the kids, keeping their spirits up with tales of adventure and the promise of a new, exciting route ahead. But her optimism couldn't dispel the unease that had settled in my gut. And then, we saw a car, or what was left of it, blocking the narrow road ahead. Its mangled frame and shattered windshield hinted at a horrific accident. My heart sank, fearing the worst. I brought the SUV to a stop, the engine idling nervously. The kids began to ask questions, their faces etched with concern, and my wife shot me a worried look. I told them to stay in the car while I investigated. As I approached the wreckage, a sense of foreboding washed over me. The car had clearly been in a terrible collision, but it was the complete absence of any emergency vehicles or first responders that sent shivers down my spine. Cautiously, I peeked inside the ruined vehicle, and my blood ran cold. The driver's seat was empty, the airbag deployed, but there was no sign of the driver. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. I stepped back, my heart pounding, and quickly returned to our SUV. I told my family what I'd seen, and we decided it was best to turn back and find another route. But as I shifted the SUV into reverse, the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. In the dim light, I could see figures emerging from the woods, shrouded in darkness. They moved silently, deliberately, and with an unsettling sense of purpose. Panic surged through me as I realized they were headed straight for us. Without hesitation, I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and reversed down the narrow lane as fast as I could. Branches scraped against the sides of our SUV as we hurtled backward, my family's terrified screams filling the air. We finally emerged from that nightmarish corridor, tires screeching as we rejoined the main road. I didn't stop until we reached the next town, where I called the police to report what we'd seen. To this day, I have no idea who or what those figures were or what happened to the driver of the wrecked car. But I know one thing for sure, that chilling encounter on that desolate road will haunt me and my family for the rest of our lives. It was a road trip we'll never forget, for all the wrong reasons. Late at night, I found myself on a lonely stretch of highway, driving through an area known for its vast forests and scarce civilization. The only source of illumination was the weak glow of my car's headlights, casting eerie shadows on the tall trees lining the road. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as I pushed further into the darkness. I'd been on the road for hours, exhaustion weighing heavily on my shoulders. The hum of the engine was the only company I had, and it was a lonesome tune. I was eager to reach my destination, a friend's cabin nestled deep in the woods, but the journey was far from comfortable. As the minutes ticked by, my eyelids grew heavy, and I fought to keep them open. That's when I noticed the car behind me. At first, I thought nothing of it, a fellow traveler, no doubt. But as the miles passed, I became increasingly aware of the car's presence. It stayed a consistent distance behind me, never deviating or attempting to pass. A cold sweat formed on my brow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I couldn't see the driver's face, shrouded in darkness and hidden behind tinted windows. Attempting to shake off my unease, I increased my speed, hoping the distance between us would grow. But the other car matched my pace effortlessly, as if it was toying with me. Panic clawed at my chest, and I debated whether to pull over and let the sinister vehicle pass. Just as I was about to make my move, my car's engine sputtered and coughed, the headlights flickering and dimming. My heart pounded as I realized I was losing power. Panic surged through me as I steered to the side of the road, my vehicle coming to an abrupt halt. In the silence that followed, I watched as the car that had been tailing me pulled up alongside my own. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a figure draped in darkness. They spoke, their voice chillingly calm. "Need a hand?" My mouth went dry, and I hesitated for a moment, considering my options. But fear won out over reason, and I nodded. The stranger exited their car, and in the dim glow of my fading headlights, I saw their silhouette approach. As they drew nearer, something about their appearance sent shivers down my spine. They wore a tattered coat, their face obscured by shadows. I couldn't make out their features, but their presence was suffocating. The stranger stopped beside my car and opened the hood, feigning an attempt to diagnose the issue. My heart raced as I realized I had no way of knowing if they were truly here to help or if this was some sinister trap. I considered making a run for it, but the remote location and my limited options left me paralyzed with fear. The stranger leaned in close, their voice a whisper in the darkness. "It's just a minor issue. I can fix it for you." As they worked under the hood, dread gnawed at my insides. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in mortal danger. Every instinct screamed at me to escape, but fear held me captive. Minutes felt like hours as I watched the stranger's every move. Finally, they stepped back and declared the car fixed. I thanked them through clenched teeth, my voice quivering. As I started the engine, I glanced nervously at the road ahead. But before I could drive away, the stranger handed me something, a small, nondescript object. "In case you run into trouble again," they said, their voice dripping with menace. I took the object without a word, my heart pounding as I watched the stranger return to their car. With a last, lingering look, they drove off into the night, leaving me alone on that desolate road. I watched their taillights disappear into the distance before finally pulling back onto the highway, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped a nightmare, that the chilling encounter with that stranger could have ended far worse. I made it to the safety of my friend's cabin that night, but sleep didn't come easily. The memory of that sinister figure and their unsettling offer haunted my thoughts. To this day, I can't help but wonder what might have happened if I hadn't been so lucky, or if luck had nothing to do with it at all. It was a moonless night as I drove back from a grueling work conference. The miles stretched endlessly in front of me, and the only companions were the rhythmic hum of my tires on the asphalt and the occasional crackling of my car radio. I'd been on the road for hours, my eyelids heavy with exhaustion, and the desolation of the empty highway did little to keep me alert. As my car pushed further into the night, I fought to keep my drooping eyes open, knowing that sleep was a far-off luxury. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, fingers aching with tension. That's when it happened, an unexpected figure emerging from the darkness. A deer, graceful and oblivious, stepped onto the road ahead. Panic surged through me as I swerved to avoid a collision. The tires screeched, and the world spun into chaos. Moments later, I found myself in the midst of a deep ditch, my car's headlights casting eerie shadows on the tall trees around me. Dazed and disoriented, I tried to make sense of what had just happened. It wasn't the deer that troubled me, it was the crushing silence that followed the accident. No crickets chirped, no night creatures stirred, it was as if the world held its breath. I stepped out of my car and scanned the area with unease. Moonlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy, leaving everything shrouded in darkness. With trembling hands, I retrieved my phone from the glove compartment, hoping to call for assistance. But as I held the phone, dread washed over me, there was no signal. Panic gnawed at my stomach as I realized the predicament I was in. Stranded on a deserted road, miles from any help, I had no choice but to start walking in search of assistance. As I stumbled through the woods, my path lit only by the faint moonlight filtering through the leaves, I couldn't help but think that this was the beginning of my worst nightmare. My footsteps echoed in the stillness, a haunting reminder of my isolation. After what felt like an eternity, I finally came upon a small clearing where the road continued. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I approached my car, I was met with an unsettling sight: the shattered window of my vehicle and the unmistakable signs of a break-in. My heart sank as I realized that while I'd been wandering in the darkness, someone had taken advantage of my vulnerability. My belongings were strewn about, my laptop gone, and my wallet emptied of cash. Panic turned to anger as I comprehended the violation I'd endured. A chill ran down my spine as I considered the implications. Had the deer been a mere distraction, a ploy to lure me from my car while someone ransacked it? It seemed like the only plausible explanation. With a sense of foreboding, I searched the surrounding woods, half expecting to find the thief lurking in the shadows. But the night remained silent and impenetrable, revealing nothing of the intruder's identity. I knew I had to make a decision: continue down this desolate road in search of help, or turn back and return to the scene of the break-in. Neither option was appealing, but I couldn't stay in the dark woods any longer. With a heavy heart, I retraced my steps, returning to the violated vehicle. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sensation that unseen eyes were tracking my every move. Anxiety clenched in my chest as I approached the car. I carefully sifted through my belongings, my heart sinking further as I realized the extent of what had been taken. But amid the chaos, one item remained: an envelope, carefully placed on the passenger seat. I hesitated before opening it, fearing what I might find. Inside was a handwritten note, its contents chillingly simple: "You're not alone." The words sent a shiver down my spine. It was clear that I was being watched, stalked by an unseen predator in the darkness. Panic threatened to consume me as I realized that I was at the mercy of this sinister stranger. I had no choice but to continue down the road, praying that I'd find help before the mysterious figure made their presence known. Every rustling leaf, every distant sound sent my heart racing, and the sensation of being hunted never left me. As I walked further into the night, the moon hanging like a specter in the sky, I couldn't help but wonder who this person was and what they wanted from me. Was it simply the thrill of the chase, or was there something far more sinister at play? Hours passed, each one feeling like an eternity, until finally, I saw the distant glow of civilization. Relief surged through me as I realized I was nearing help. But as I approached, I couldn't escape the feeling that this nightmare was far from over. It was a late autumn evening, and I was on a long drive with my 2 young daughters to visit family. The road stretched on for miles, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, we decided it was time to grab a quick dinner. We pulled into a small, dimly lit diner that seemed like it had seen better days. As we settled into a booth, I couldn't help but notice 2 men sitting at the counter. They were dressed in worn-out jeans and leather jackets, their eyes fixed on us with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to ignore their gaze, chalking it up to coincidence, but the feeling of unease lingered. We ordered our food and tried to engage in casual conversation, but my daughters seemed just as aware of the 2 men as I was. Their laughter was strained, and they couldn't eat quickly enough. As we paid our bill and prepared to leave, I discreetly glanced over my shoulder to check if the men were still at the counter. My heart sank when I saw them rise from their seats, leaving their untouched plates behind. It was clear they intended to follow us. With a sense of urgency, I ushered my daughters out of the diner, the bell above the door jingling as we stepped into the chilly night. The 2 men were right behind us, their heavy footsteps echoing ominously. I quickened our pace, hoping to put some distance between us and the strangers. Fear gnawed me as I realized that we were in an unfamiliar town, far from anyone who could help us. We reached our car and piled in, my hands trembling as I fumbled for the keys. The engine roared to life just as the 2 men reached the parking lot. I slammed the car into gear and peeled out of the lot, tires screeching. As we merged onto the highway, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the men climb into a black pickup truck. Panic surged through me as I realized they were following us onto the highway. Desperation set in as I sped down the dark, winding road. My daughters were terrified in the back seat, and I did my best to reassure them, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I made a series of quick turns, hoping to lose our pursuers, but they stuck with us, their headlights looming ominously in our rearview mirror. It was clear they were determined to follow us, and I couldn't fathom why. My mind raced, and I remembered passing a police station just a few miles back. With a surge of hope, I decided to make a break for it and pulled onto the shoulder to execute a U-turn. My heart pounded in my chest as I saw the men do the same. We raced back toward the police station, the distance between us and our pursuers closing with every second. I prayed that we'd make it in time, that the sight of a police station would deter them. As we pulled into the station's parking lot, I let out a sigh of relief. I parked the car and jumped out, my daughters following close behind. I scanned the area, searching for the two men, but they were nowhere to be seen. We hurried inside, and I explained the situation to the officers on duty. They assured us they'd keep an eye out for the men and offered to escort us to our family's home. With the police by our side, we finally felt safe, and the rest of our journey passed without incident. But the memory of those two men, their predatory stares and relentless pursuit, haunted my dreams for weeks. I couldn't help but wonder what their intentions had been that night and why they had singled us out. Late at night, I found myself driving back from my mom's place. The journey was nothing out of the ordinary, a familiar route I had taken countless times before. The only difference was the time. It was pitch black outside, and the desolate road stretched ahead, illuminated only by the dim glow of my headlights. My mom lived in a quiet, remote area, and the drive back home was always a peaceful one. That night, however, an uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach as I navigated the winding roads. The silence was almost suffocating, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. As I rounded a bend, I noticed a set of headlights in my rearview mirror. A car had appeared seemingly out of nowhere and was tailgating me closely. I felt my heart rate quicken as their bright beams bore into my rear window. I decided to speed up, hoping the car would eventually pass me by. But no matter how fast I went, the car remained right on my tail, like a shadow in the night. Panic began to well up within me. Who were these people, and why were they following me? I reached for my phone to call the police, but my trembling hands made it difficult to dial. Glancing at the road ahead, I noticed a sign indicating a nearby gas station. It was the only place to pull over for miles. As I pulled into the gas station, the unknown car followed suit, parking a few spaces away. My heart pounded in my chest as I desperately searched for any sign of help. There was no one else around, just the eerie silence of the night. Summoning my courage, I stepped out of my car, hoping to confront the strangers and ask why they were following me. But as I approached their vehicle, my blood ran cold. The driver's window was rolled down, and the driver's seat was empty. My heart raced, and I felt a sense of impending doom. I turned to rush back to my car, but before I could reach it, I heard a soft voice behind me. "Need some help, miss?" Startled, I spun around to see a man standing there, shrouded in darkness. He was tall and slender, wearing a tattered jacket and a white-brimmed hat that concealed most of his face. Fear gripped me as I realized that he must have been in the car that had followed me. I stammered out a response, telling him that I was fine and didn't need any help. But he persisted, taking a step closer. The dim light revealed a sinister grin on his face, and I could see his eyes gleaming with malice. Panic set in, and I bolted for my car, jumping in and locking the doors. The man followed, approaching my window with a predatory look in his eyes. He tapped on the glass, making me jump, and I could hear him whispering unintelligibly. I revved the engine and sped out of the gas station, leaving the man behind. My hands were shaking so violently that it was difficult to keep the car steady on the road. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I kept driving, praying that I would encounter other cars or find a police station. The minutes stretched on like hours, and I constantly checked my rearview mirror, expecting to see the sinister car again. Finally, I spotted the comforting glow of a well-lit convenience store up ahead. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed a couple walking towards their car. I rolled down my window and explained my situation, begging for help. They kindly agreed to stay with me until the police arrived, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The authorities arrived soon after, taking my statement and promising to investigate the unsettling encounter. I continued on my journey home, accompanied by a police escort. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but the memory of that chilling encounter still haunts me to this day. I was driving through the heart of Ohio late at night, the road stretching endlessly before me like a never-ending ribbon of asphalt. The darkness enveloped everything beyond the reach of my headlights, and the only sound was the low hum of my car's engine. I'd taken this route countless times, but that night was different. It was a perfect storm of eerie quietude and solitude. The monotony of the drive had lulled me into a sense of drowsiness, my eyelids growing heavy as I fought to stay awake. I'd been on the road for hours, chasing a deadline that loomed over me like a storm cloud. My mind was a haze of exhaustion and anxiety. Just as I was beginning to wonder if I should pull over and rest, I saw something up ahead, a lone figure standing on the shoulder of the road. My first thought was that it must be someone in need of help, stranded by their broken-down car. The better part of me told me to keep driving, but my conscience got the best of me, so I slowed down and pulled over to offer assistance. As I approached, the details of the figure became clearer. It was a man, his clothes tattered and dirty. His eyes were hollow, and he wore an expression of despair that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread wash over me, but I rolled down my window and asked if he needed help. His voice was a trembling whisper as he explained that his car had broken down miles back, and he'd been walking in the darkness, searching for help. He looked harmless enough, but something about his demeanor set me on edge. I agreed to give him a lift to the nearest gas station, which was about 20 minutes away. He climbed into the back seat, and as I continued down the empty road, he began to make small talk. He told me his name was David and that he was passing through Ohio on his way to visit family. Though his words were friendly, his presence made me uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I chided myself for being paranoid. Maybe it was just the exhaustion playing tricks on me. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the rumble of the engine and the tires on the pavement. It wasn't until I glanced in the rearview mirror that I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. David was staring at me, his gaze never wavering. I nervously cleared my throat and asked if he was okay. He smiled, but it was a smile devoid of warmth. "I'm just tired," he said, his voice taking on an unsettling edge. "You know how it is, driving alone at night." My unease deepened, and I wished I'd never stopped to pick him up. I began to regret my decision, but pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on getting to the gas station and ending this eerie encounter. As we neared our destination, David's behavior became increasingly erratic. He started muttering to himself in a hushed, frenzied tone. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but the tone of his voice was unsettling, to say the least. My heart raced as I pulled into the well-lit gas station, relieved that our strange journey was nearly over. I turned to David and told him we'd arrived, expecting him to get out of the car and be on his way. But he didn't move. Instead, he turned his gaze towards me, and his eyes were no longer empty but filled with a sinister intensity. He leaned closer, his hot breath brushing against my ear, and whispered, "I know what you did." Panic coursed through me as his words hung in the air, chilling me to the bone. What could he possibly know? My mind raced, trying to make sense of his cryptic statement. I had to get out of there, away from this man who had gone from a weary traveler to a menacing stranger. Without a second thought, I flung open the car door and sprinted towards the gas station, shouting for help. The attendants inside the store rushed to my aid, and I quickly explained the bizarre and terrifying encounter I'd just had. They called the police, and as I watched from the safety of the gas station, officers arrived and apprehended David. I could see him being handcuffed, his face contorted with anger and confusion. The police questioned me extensively, and I recounted every detail of the unsettling drive. They assured me that they would look into David's background and try to determine what he had meant by those chilling words. Shaken to my core, I resumed my journey, the events of that night forever etched into my memory. I couldn't help but wonder what David had been referring to, and if there was any truth to his cryptic accusation. But one thing was certain: I would never stop to offer a stranger a ride again, not after that night on the desolate roads of Ohio. I'd been driving for hours, my eyelids heavy with fatigue, my mind clouded by weariness. The radio played static, and I'd long given up on trying to find a station that could break the monotonous silence. The only thing on my mind was reaching my destination. A few more hours of driving and I'd be there. But then, out of nowhere, it happened: a loud crash, the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. My heart leaped in my chest as I instinctively swerved to the side of the road, my adrenaline pumping. The windshield before me was splintered into a spider web of cracks, the point of impact a gaping hole. Fear surged through me as I realized someone had thrown something at my car. I peered through the shattered glass into the inky darkness, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. But there was nothing, just a black abyss. After a moment of disbelief, I decided I had to pull over and assess the damage. I turned on my hazard lights and brought the car to a stop on the desolate roadside. Rain poured outside, adding to the sense of isolation. As I got out of the car, my heart pounded in my chest. Raindrops soaked my clothes as I approached the shattered window, shards of glass glinting ominously in the dim light. I couldn't see any immediate danger, but my gut told me to be cautious. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl, like some wild animal lurking in the shadows. My heart raced as I scanned the darkness, trying to locate the source of the sound. There, a few yards away, I saw movement, a silhouette, hunched and menacing. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but my voice quivered with fear. The figure remained still, its eyes reflecting the faintest glimmer of light from the car's hazard lights. Panic set in as I realized that whatever or whoever it was, it didn't intend to answer. With adrenaline surging, I made a split-second decision to retreat to my car. I needed to call for help, to get out of this isolated nightmare. But as I turned to dash back to the vehicle, I heard a rush of movement behind me. Before I could react, a second figure emerged from the darkness, blocking my path to the car. Fear coursed through me, and I fumbled for my phone, praying I could dial 911 in time. The rain-soaked screen and trembling fingers slowed me down, each second feeling like an eternity. Just as I managed to hit the call button, I felt a strong grip on my shoulder, pulling me backward. The phone slipped from my hand, and I was violently spun around to face my assailant. It was the first figure, its face obscured by shadows and a mask of malevolence. I struggled against their grasp, my heart pounding like a drum. My pleas for help were met with eerie silence, the rain drowning out any hope of rescue. Panic surged as I realized the situation was growing increasingly dire. Then, out of nowhere, a third figure appeared from the darkness, a shadowy presence that seemed to materialize from thin air. The trio of assailants closed in on me, their intentions unmistakably malicious. I could see glimmers of malevolent glee in their eyes, a sickening hunger that sent shivers down my spine. In that desperate moment, I knew I had to fight for my life. Adrenaline surged through me, and I lashed out with every ounce of strength I had. Blow after blow, I fought back against the attackers, my survival instinct overpowering my fear. I managed to break free, stumbling backward, my vision blurred with pain and terror. But there was no time to rest. I had to get away from these monsters. With all the energy I could muster, I turned and sprinted down the dark road, rain-soaked and injured, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind me. I ran as fast as my trembling legs would carry me, my mind racing with thoughts of escape, of finding help, of surviving this nightmare. The darkness seemed unending, the road stretching into eternity, and my lungs burned with each frantic breath. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted the faint glow of approaching headlights. Relief washed over me as I stumbled onto the road, frantically waving my arms to flag down the oncoming vehicle. It screeched to a halt, and a concerned driver emerged, their face a mixture of shock and concern. I begged for help, explaining the harrowing encounter that had just unfolded. They immediately called the police, who arrived shortly after. An intense search of the area was conducted, but the assailants had vanished into the night. I was taken to the hospital to treat my injuries and provide a statement to the police. They assured me that they would do everything in their power to find the individuals responsible for this terrifying assault. My buddy Jake and I were on a road trip, the kind of spontaneous adventure that makes life interesting. It was late, and the only thing that illuminated the desolate highway was our car's headlights. We were both hungry and decided to stop at a rundown convenience store we stumbled upon in the middle of nowhere. The store seemed straight out of a horror movie. Its flickering neon sign cast eerie shadows on the cracked asphalt. We parked and exchanged nervous glances, but decided our growling stomachs were worth the risk. I mean, how bad could it be? We entered the dimly lit store, and a cold draft welcomed us. The shelves were sparsely stocked with dusty, expired goods. A single, flickering fluorescent light gave the place an eerie glow. A man behind the counter, a grizzled fellow in his 50s, gave us a curt nod. Ignoring the unsettling atmosphere, we began picking out snacks and drinks. As we perused the aisles, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. The place was empty except for the cashier, but the unease persisted. While grabbing some chips, Jake whispered to me, "Do you feel that, man? This place gives me the creeps." I nodded in agreement, a knot forming in my stomach. We quickly made our selections and headed to the counter. The cashier rang up our items with a cold, uninterested demeanor. Then, out of nowhere, he looked us straight in the eyes and said, "Y'all ain't from around here, are ya?" I chuckled nervously, "No, just passing through." The cashier's expression didn't change as he muttered, "Well, best be on your way then, city boys." We paid and left the store, the heavy wooden door creaking shut behind us. The night air felt cooler, but the unease from inside still clung to us. As we headed back to our car, we noticed a group of locals gathered nearby. Their eyes bore into us, suspicion and hostility evident. They whispered among themselves, casting sidelong glances in our direction. It was as if we had intruded upon their territory, and they didn't take kindly to strangers. Jake and I quickened our pace, hoping to avoid any confrontation. But as we reached our car, the group of locals began to close in, blocking our path. One of them, a burly man with a scruffy beard, stepped forward, his voice laced with aggression. "Y'all thought you could just waltz in here, outsiders, and leave without so much as a howdy do?" My heart raced as I realized we were in a potentially dangerous situation. I tried to diffuse the tension, explaining that we meant no harm and were simply passing through. But my words fell on deaf ears. The leader of the group took a menacing step closer, his buddies closing in behind him. He sneered, "City boys like you ought to learn some respect. We don't take kindly to your type around here." Before I could react, the situation escalated. One of the locals shoved Jake, sending him stumbling backward. I moved to intervene, but another grabbed my arm, preventing me from reaching my friend. Fear coursed through me as I watched Jake being surrounded by the hostile group. They were outnumbered, and there was no way we could fight our way out of this. The leader, his face contorted with anger, leaned in close to Jake and spat out a chilling threat. "You got two choices, city boy. Hand over your wallets and get out of here, or things are gonna get real ugly." With no other option, we complied, tossing our wallets onto the ground. The locals grabbed them and backed away, leaving us shaken and humiliated. As they retreated, the leader issued a final warning: "Consider this a lesson, outsiders. Don't ever come back." We watched in silence as they disappeared into the darkness, our wallets and dignity stolen. With trembling hands, we got into the car and drove away, the taste of fear and helplessness lingering in the air. We didn't stop until we reached a well-lit gas station miles away, where we finally felt safe enough to report the incident to the authorities. Though our wallets were gone, we were thankful to have escaped the chilling encounter with our lives intact. It was a stark reminder that sometimes the most terrifying experiences are the ones you stumble upon in the darkest corners of the world, far from the comfort of familiarity. And as we continued our road trip, we couldn't help but glance nervously at every convenience store we passed, haunted by the memory of that ominous night in the middle of nowhere. This happened to me around 4 years ago now. I was driving alone in my old beat-up sedan. I had received an urgent call from my dad, who needed a ride from a nearby town. It was past midnight, and the road was dark and eerily quiet. As I sped along the deserted highway, my mind drifted to my dad's situation. He rarely asked for help, so it must have been something serious. The tension built up inside me as I contemplated the unknown. Suddenly, a pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, rapidly approaching. The car behind me was tailgating dangerously, and I couldn't make out its make or model. Anxiety surged through me as I glanced at my speedometer. I was already driving above the limit. I switched lanes, hoping the aggressive driver would pass me, but they followed suit. Panic gnawed at me as I realized this wasn't just a careless tailgater, it was someone with malicious intent. My heart raced, and I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. As the menacing vehicle continued to shadow me, my mind raced through possible explanations. Maybe it was a road rage incident, or perhaps they were trying to carjack me. Regardless of the reason, I knew I had to act. I attempted to put some distance between us by accelerating, but the driver behind me matched my speed, inching closer with every second. Fear coursed through my veins as I considered my next move. Up ahead, I spotted a well-lit gas station, a beacon of hope in the inky darkness. I made the split-second decision to make a run for it. As I approached the entrance, I prayed that someone would be there to witness what was happening. I swung into the gas station, tires screeching, and rushed out of my car. My heart pounded in my chest as I sprinted toward the store, frantically searching for anyone who could help. The gas station attendant was outside, taking a break. I yelled, "Call the police. Someone's chasing me." Without hesitation, the attendant grabbed his phone and dialed 911. I explained the situation, my voice trembling, and he assured me that help was on the way. As we waited for the police, I watched the menacing car slow down and circle the gas station, its headlights illuminating my desperate face. The driver's intent was clear. They weren't going to let me escape so easily. When the police arrived, they quickly surrounded the aggressor's vehicle, guns drawn. The driver was apprehended, and I breathed a sigh of relief. As it turned out, the person behind the wheel was a complete stranger, their motives still a mystery. They were arrested and taken into custody, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me. I finally picked up my dad, who was equally baffled by the chilling encounter. We drove home together, our conversation filled with questions and unease. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind kept replaying the events on that desolate highway. I had narrowly escaped a terrifying encounter with a stranger whose intentions I would never fully understand. It was a typical Friday night in the city, and I had just begun my shift as an Uber driver. The app chimed, signaling a new ride request. I glanced at my phone, noting the pickup location was in a somewhat desolate part of town. The screen displayed the name Evan as the passenger. As I approached the location, my unease grew. The area was dimly lit, with abandoned warehouses and graffiti-covered buildings lining the streets. It was the kind of neighborhood I usually try to avoid, but a job was a job, and I couldn't afford to be picky. I pulled up to the designated spot, and that's when I saw him. Evan, my passenger, was standing under a flickering streetlight, dressed in a tattered coat that seemed out of place in the mild weather. He looked disheveled, his hair unkempt, and his eyes darted nervously as he approached my car. "Hey, are you Evan?" I asked as he climbed into the back seat. He didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed on something outside the window. "Yeah," he finally muttered, his voice shaky. I could tell something was off, but I brushed it off as social awkwardness and began the ride. Evan directed me to a remote address on the outskirts of the city, far away from the bustling nightlife. As we drove, he remained silent, occasionally glancing over his shoulder as if he expected someone to be following us. The tension inside the car was palpable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I glanced at my rearview mirror and noticed Evan's hands trembling in his lap. "Everything okay back there?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Evan didn't respond for a moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice quivered. "Can you please drive faster? I need to get there as soon as possible." I obliged, pushing the speed limit as we raced through the empty streets. Evan's anxiety was contagious, and I couldn't help but worry about what he was so afraid of. As we approached our destination, I realized we were heading into an even more desolate area, a secluded, wooded spot far from any residential areas or businesses. Panic began to gnaw at me, but I couldn't simply abandon my passenger in the middle of nowhere. Evan suddenly instructed me to pull over at an isolated dirt road leading into the woods. "Stop here," he commanded, his voice more forceful now. I hesitated, my instinct screaming at me to drive away, but I complied. Evan got out of the car without a word, leaving the door ajar. He disappeared into the dark forest, and the sound of his footsteps soon faded. Terrified and unsure of what to do, I sat in the car for what felt like an eternity. The rational part of my brain urged me to leave, but a morbid curiosity kept me rooted in my seat. I needed to know what had just transpired. Eventually, I summoned the courage to step out of the car and follow Evan's path into the woods. My phone's flashlight pierced through the thick, eerie darkness, illuminating the trail ahead. As I ventured deeper into the forest, dread washed over me. It was then that I stumbled upon a chilling sight, a shallow, makeshift grave. Panic welled up inside me as I realized what I was looking at. Fearful that Evan might return, I quickly retreated and rushed back to my car. I sped away from that nightmarish scene, my heart pounding in my chest. I immediately called the police and reported the disturbing encounter. They assured me they would investigate the matter, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped a horrifying fate. To this day, I can't forget that unsettling night and the enigmatic passenger named Evan. It had been a long, exhausting day at the office. The clock on my car's dashboard read 11:45 p.m. as I pulled out of the dimly lit parking lot. My route home took me through a quiet, suburban neighborhood, and the streets were nearly deserted at this late hour. A light drizzle had begun to fall, adding to the gloomy atmosphere. I turned up the radio, trying to stay awake during the monotonous drive. My wife and kids were fast asleep back home, and all I wanted was to join them in our warm, cozy house. Little did I know, this night would take an unexpected, terrifying turn. As I approached an intersection, my headlights revealed a lone figure standing on the side of the road. It was a man, dressed in tattered clothing that clung to his emaciated frame. His hair was matted, and he looked like he hadn't bathed in weeks. He held a cardboard sign that simply read, "Help." Feeling a pang of sympathy, I slowed down and rolled down my window. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice tinged with concern. The man turned his vacant eyes toward me, and for a moment, I could see the desperation in his gaze. "Please, mister, I just need a ride. I'm freezing out here." Against my better judgment, I unlocked the passenger door, and the stranger climbed in. His presence sent a shiver down my spine, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. "Where are you headed?" I asked as I pulled back onto the road. He hesitated for a moment before muttering, "Just keep driving straight. I'll tell you when to stop." As we continued down the dark, rainy streets, an eerie silence settled over the car. I couldn't help but steal glances at my passenger, his haggard appearance and the unsettling vibe he exuded unnerving me. Several minutes passed in silence before he finally spoke again. "Turn left up ahead," he instructed, his voice trembling. I obeyed, turning onto a deserted, dimly lit road. The rain was falling harder now, and the windshield wipers struggled to keep up. The atmosphere in the car had grown stifling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. "Stop here," he suddenly commanded, his voice taking on an urgency that sent alarm bells ringing in my head. I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart pounding in my chest. The stranger wasted no time, unbuckling his seatbelt and lunging toward me. In a split second, his cold, clammy hand clamped over my mouth, and his wild eyes bore into mine. "Give me your wallet," he hissed, his voice a menacing whisper. I fumbled to retrieve my wallet from my pocket, my hand shaking with fear. He snatched the wallet from my trembling fingers and quickly rifled through it, extracting all the cash. With a final, menacing glare, he shoved the wallet back at me and flung open the car door. Before I could react, he disappeared into the rain-soaked night. I sat there in stunned silence, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The realization of what had just happened slowly sank in, and I realized that I had narrowly escaped a potentially life-threatening situation. I waited for a few minutes, my heart still racing, before I cautiously drove away from that desolate road. I knew I had to report the encounter to the police, but the fear and shock still clouded my thoughts. As I finally pulled into my driveway, I couldn't help but glance nervously around, half expecting the stranger to reappear. I hurried inside, locked all the doors, and woke my wife to tell her the horrifying tale. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that my world had shifted. I was on my way to pick up my daughter, Lily, from her boyfriend's house. She had called, sounding anxious, asking if I could come get her. I didn't ask questions. I just wanted to make sure she was safe. The rain was pouring down in sheets, making visibility nearly impossible. My windshield wipers worked furiously, but they couldn't keep up with the downpour. The dim glow of the streetlights cast long, ominous shadows that seemed to dance and flicker with the rain. As I approached an intersection, the traffic light blinked its ominous red, warning me to stop. I obeyed, my car's engine idling softly. The rain on the roof was a constant, hypnotic drumming that made me feel drowsy. Suddenly, a pair of blindingly bright headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. They were so close that I instinctively glanced at my speedometer, thinking maybe I was driving too slowly. But I was doing the speed limit. The car behind me didn't seem to care. It tailgated me relentlessly, its high beams blinding me in my rearview mirror. Panic started to creep in. I had heard stories of aggressive drivers on these dark, rain-soaked roads. I tried to keep my focus on the red light ahead. The car behind me honked its horn impatiently, and I could see the silhouette of the driver gesticulating wildly. Fear gripped me, and I thought about running the red light just to get away from this lunatic. But then, the situation took a bizarre twist. I heard a siren. Glancing in my rearview mirror, I saw flashing blue and red lights. Relief washed over me. It was the police. I signaled and pulled over to the side of the road, grateful for their presence. 2 officers approached my car, one on each side. They were dressed in full police uniform, complete with badges and utility belts. I rolled down my window and was immediately hit with the stench of rain-soaked wool and leather. "Ma'am, do you know why we pulled you over?" the officer on my side asked, his voice low and authoritative. "No, officer," I stammered, my anxiety returning. "I was just driving to pick up my daughter." The officer nodded. "We've had reports of a suspicious vehicle matching your description in this area. We need to check your license and registration." I handed over my documents, my hands trembling. The officer examined them carefully, his partner standing by, seemingly uninterested. The rain pounded on the roof of the car, creating a surreal backdrop to this bizarre encounter. The officer handed my documents back and smiled, a sinister, predatory grin. "Everything seems to be in order, ma'am. You're free to go." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I started to pull away, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw the officers watching me, still smiling that unnerving smile. I drove a few blocks, my heart pounding in my chest. Something didn't feel right. I pulled into a well-lit gas station and picked up my phone to call the police. As I dialed 911, I glanced back at the intersection I had just left. The police car was still there, parked in the shadows. But now it was empty. The 911 operator assured me that officers would be dispatched to investigate. I sat in my car, the rain continuing to pour, feeling exposed and vulnerable. What had just happened? Were those real police officers or imposters? When the real police arrived, they searched the area but found no trace of the officers I had encountered. They took a statement from me and assured me they would investigate further. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in the pit of my stomach. As I finally picked up Lily and returned home, I couldn't help but replay the strange encounter in my mind. Who were those men, and what had they wanted? The rain had stopped, and the night was still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister had just crossed my path. The incident haunted my thoughts for weeks. I watched the news, hoping for some explanation, but there was never any mention of police imposters in the area. The mystery remained unsolved, a chilling encounter on a dark, rainy night that left me with more questions than answers. My partner and I have been living the nomadic life for a couple of years now, cruising the country in our trusty camper van. It had become our home, a cozy haven on wheels. We embraced the freedom it offered, the open road our constant companion. One chilly, moonless night, we found ourselves on a remote stretch of highway, far from civilization. The stars above were the only source of illumination. My partner was at the wheel, and I was lounging in the back, lost in my thoughts. The hum of the engine was a soothing lullaby as I gazed out the window, watching the barren landscape slip past. Miles and miles of darkness, interrupted only by the occasional pair of headlights coming from the opposite direction. We were in the middle of nowhere, and that's exactly how we liked it. Suddenly, my partner's voice sliced through the silence, a tremor of fear threading through their words. "Did you see that?" Startled, I sat up and looked out the window, my eyes scanning the inky darkness. "See what?" My partner pointed a trembling finger towards the rearview mirror. There, in the distance, were 2 points of light, steadily growing closer. Headlights. "Maybe it's just another traveler," I said, trying to calm their nerves. But something about the situation felt off. The lights were too bright, too aggressive. They seemed to be gaining on us at an alarming rate. My partner gripped the steering wheel tightly, their knuckles white. "I'm not so sure about that." As the vehicle approached, it revealed itself as a large, black SUV. It was tailgating us, the driver apparently in a hurry. My partner, unsure of what to do, maintained our speed and stayed in our lane. But the SUV showed no signs of slowing down. It edged closer and closer until it was almost on top of us, its headlights blinding us in the pitch-black night. Panic surged through me. "What's going on?" I shouted, my heart pounding. My partner's voice trembled as they replied, "I have no idea. But I don't like it." Desperate to escape the relentless pursuit, my partner decided to pull over onto the shoulder to let the aggressive driver pass. The SUV roared past us, its tires screeching against the asphalt. It didn't slow down, didn't acknowledge our presence in any way. Relieved, we watched the taillights of the SUV fade into the distance. But our relief was short-lived. As the SUV disappeared from sight, we noticed something even more unsettling, a second pair of headlights approaching us from behind. This time, it was a pickup truck, and it was tailgating us just as aggressively as the SUV had. The dread that had momentarily lifted now descended upon us like a suffocating shroud. My partner's voice quivered with fear. "What's happening? Why are they doing this?" I had no answers, only a growing sense of unease. The pickup truck showed no intention of passing us. Instead, it continued to tailgate, its presence looming large and menacing in our rearview mirror. My partner decided to take a different approach this time. They gently accelerated, hoping to put some distance between us and the relentless pursuer. But it was futile. The pickup truck matched our speed, maintaining its unnerving proximity. As minutes turned into hours, or so it felt, the tension in the camper van was unbearable. Every twist and turn of the desolate road seemed to take us deeper into this nightmare. The pickup truck's headlights bore into our souls, and my partner and I exchanged fearful glances. My phone, our lifeline to the outside world, was tucked away in a corner of the camper. It felt like miles away, unreachable. Our thoughts raced, each passing moment intensifying our dread. Were we being targeted? Was this some kind of elaborate game? My partner made a split-second decision. They veered onto a narrow side road, hoping to lose our pursuer in the maze of unfamiliar terrain. The unpaved road was bumpy, jolting us around in the camper, but it provided a brief respite from the relentless pickup truck. We sped down the winding path, branches scraping against the sides of our van. I held onto anything I could find, the claustrophobic confines of our home becoming a prison of fear. But just as we dared to hope we had escaped, we saw them, the headlights of the pickup truck emerging from the darkness, doggedly following our every move. It was as if our tormentor knew this terrain as well as we didn't. We were trapped in a nightmarish game of cat and mouse, with no end in sight. panic gnawed at the edges of our sanity as we desperately sought a way out of this relentless pursuit. The road seemed endless, stretching on into the abyss, and our pursuer showed no signs of giving up. The pickup truck continued to tailgate us, its presence an unyielding shadow cast over our lives. Hours turned into an eternity as we raced through the wilderness, our camper van a tiny vessel adrift on a sea of darkness. My partner's knuckles were raw from gripping the steering wheel, their eyes wide with terror. Suddenly, an idea struck me, an insane, desperate idea. I crawled to the back of the van, searching for something, anything that could help us. My hands landed on a can of emergency flares we kept for roadside breakdowns. I pulled one out, my heart pounding in my chest. With trembling hands, I lit the flare and hurled it out the window, aiming for the road behind us. It burst into a fiery red glow, illuminating the night. The blinding light revealed the pickup truck, its driver momentarily blinded by the unexpected flare. It swerved wildly, tires screeching on the gravel. It was our chance. My partner floored the gas pedal, and our camper van roared to life, hurtling forward. We raced away from the disoriented pickup truck, our hearts pounding with a mix of terror and hope. For a while, it seemed like we had lost our pursuer. The road ahead stretched on, empty and quiet. We dared to hope that we had finally escaped from the relentless chase. But just when we thought we were safe, the pickup truck reappeared in our rearview mirror, its headlights blazing with renewed determination. It was as if it couldn't be deterred, as if nothing could stop it from haunting our every move. Desperation fueled my partner's actions. They pushed our camper van to its limits, hurtling down the winding road as if our lives depended on it, because they did. I clung to my seat, praying for a miracle. And then, as if in answer to our prayers, we saw the distant glow of approaching headlights. Another vehicle was heading towards us from the opposite direction. We flashed our headlights, honked our horn, anything to get their attention. The approaching vehicle slowed down, its driver sensing something was amiss. As it drew closer, we could see it was a semi-truck, massive and imposing. It blocked the narrow road, leaving no room for the pickup truck to pass. Our pursuer had no choice but to come to a screeching halt, trapped behind the massive semi. We watched in disbelief as the pickup truck's driver realized their escape was thwarted. The driver of the semi got out and approached our camper van. Their face was a mix of concern and confusion as we explained the harrowing ordeal we had just endured. They offered to stay with us until the authorities arrived, ensuring our safety. The police arrived soon after, and the pickup truck's driver was apprehended. It turned out to be a deranged individual with a history of dangerous behavior. They had fixated on us for reasons we couldn't comprehend. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of what had happened sunk in. We had narrowly escaped a chilling encounter with someone who seemed determined to harm us. The relief was overwhelming, but it was tinged with the knowledge that our lives had been forever changed by that night. We continued our nomadic journey, but the memory of that terrifying pursuit never left us. It was a nightmare that haunted our every mile, a chilling encounter with the darkest side of humanity, and a reminder that the open road was not always a place of freedom and escape, but sometimes a treacherous path filled with danger and uncertainty.